phone and call suicide prevention hotline there on the Golden Gate Bridge. We spend lots of money to try to keep people from committing suicide. So we, at one level, I would argue, we do, even materialists, know that there's something special about humans, that they shouldn't be killing themselves. On the other hand, when persons reach people have terminal illnesses, we then can say, well, those people's lives don't really have value. Of course, and to be really consistent, I think the materials are saying that no human life really has any significance or value. But then we can just sort of make these arbitrary guidelines. So in the state of Washington, Oregon, California, and several others, we now have physician-assisted suicide where people with terminal illnesses can get physicians to help them commit suicide at the end of their lives. So we've made this judgment that their lives don't have value any longer and will even help you commit suicide.
If you look at American life and statistics, and this is something that I'm very concerned with and talk about a lot on the radio, right now we've made progress in so many areas. We have fewer traffic deaths. We have fewer gun accidents. We have greatly reduced the levels of homicide in our country to levels that many people thought were impossible. The one area where we have not made progress is suicide. This is, as a matter of fact, when you talk about gun deaths, which of course is a very big concern of the left, the great majority of gun deaths now are people using firearms to end their own lives. Do you think that this reflects some of these cultural, philosophical changes that you're talking about?
Oh, I'm convinced it does. And in fact, there was really no significant debate about suicide in Western society until the Enlightenment period. In the Enlightenment period, there were a number of writers and philosophers who began writing about suicide and began condoning suicide. David Hume, for example, one of the more famous British philosophers of the 18th century, wrote an essay called On Suicide. He published this posthumously because he knew it was very controversial, but he basically said that everyone should have a right to take their own life, and he also said very clearly in that essay that the life of a human has no more significance to the cosmos than the life of an oyster.
That sounds like
that was the comparison. Yeah, and that was the comparison that he made at that time. So that was the sort of opening salve. And there were several others during the 18th century also who made arguments about suicide as well. Then when you move into the 19th century, there was no significant debate about euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide until the 1870s, and that opened up after Darwinism came on the scene too. But it wasn't just Darwinism. It was Darwinism together with other secularizing tendencies at the time. But those two things together were going to give rise to the euthanasia debate. So there's very clear historical evidence that these philosophical ideas did help bring about approval for suicide and assisted suicide later on. And I think we can still see that today.
There's another obsession of contemporary society that your book touches upon, which at its very heart is physical, materialistic, which has to do with sexuality. What does this have to do with the fact that right now we have a culture that seems to be saturated with sexuality?
Yeah, interestingly, once again, going back to the Enlightenment period, there actually is a historian just a few years ago from Oxford University who wrote a book called The First Sexual Revolution. And he was talking about the 18th century Enlightenment period. And so there was a lot of sexual libertinism during the Enlightenment period that flowed out of this idea that we're just all about a pursuit of pleasure. And so one of the things I talk about in one of the chapters of my book is this notion of that all we as humans are is just a machine that is just seeking pleasure. And so everything is about our pleasure seeking, and so sort of sexual mores then are considered a hindrance to that, and so then we should be pursuing sexual pleasure in whatever ways we want to, as long as it's not harming other people.
Well, and de-emphasize any reproductive elements, and de-emphasize any spiritual elements to that connection.
And even de-emphasize any notion of love, which is a notion that evaporates in the materialistic critique.
Which is a spiritual notion at its very heart. Dr. Weikert, humanity's past and present, our self-image as human beings, all of these are ultimate questions that men and women have always been asking about ourselves. Thank you for joining me today to talk about your new book, The Death of Humanity. For more about Dr. Weikert's work, be sure to visit our website. Our website is mindswithmedved.com, or you can go directly to Dr. Weikert's own website, which is darwintohitler.com. Your work challenges some of the fashionable narratives assumed by popular culture and some professional scholarship as well. To see how your writing all fits together, I would encourage our audience to visit our website, mindswithmedved.com, to subscribe. And while you're there, be sure to consider donating to continue this kind of work and to provide future episodes of Great Minds with Michael Medved. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Great Minds with Michael Medved, available at mindswithmedved.com. Great Minds with Michael Medved is produced by Jeremy Steiner and Greg Tomlin and is copyrighted by Discovery Institute 2018.